Years ago, Lana Lang had packed her bags and was waiting at the bus station when Clark Kent caught up to her, wondering where she was going. In truth, he knew she had already made up her mind to leave Smallville and do more with her life, but he'd hoped she would stay and continue their relationship. As much as she cared about him, she knew he was destined for greater things too. 4 years later, Clark was doing greater things, fighting a gang of criminals called the Supremacists in Metropolis. Their goals involved human sacrifices to fifth-dimensional plasma gods and the mass murder of undocumented immigrants, a fact which Superman took personally. After giving the thugs a beatdown, Clark realized he was smiling until the people he had just saved began to run from him in terror. Though he wanted to reassure them, he was more concerned with burning down the warehouse they had been trapped in. Watching, one of the Supremacists began to cry, and Clark could only laugh. Later that night, as he began to write up the events of that day for the Daily Star, he began to feel pangs of guilt and shame. He had punched down that day. With all his power, was he nothing more than a bully? Overhearing a news report through his neighbor's wall, Clark learned of a superstorm heading toward the eastern seaboard, straight toward Gotham City, where a total blackout had already sent the city into chaos. The order had gone out to evacuate flood zones, but without power, no one could be sure the message had gone through. Hearing this, Clark had a crazy idea. He would stop the storm. Lana Lang, meanwhile, was working as an electrical engineer on a tanker 2 leagues off the coast of Gotham, and she knew the helicopter sent to get them to safety wouldn't have room for everyone on board. Her focus was set on getting the ship's engines started again. Angrily, her captain warned her to get onto the chopper, as it would be her last chance to reach safety, but she refused. Superman knew his plan was folly, but he intended to create a vortex of wind and water large enough to break the hurricane. In practice, he was elated to discover that it worked, until it didn't. The storm was too powerful, and it knocked him beneath the violent waves. Forcing himself above water, he spotted the tanker as the storm began tossing it straight at a listing cargo ship. The cargo ship had been abandoned, but its course would be deadly for the tanker and its remaining crew. Lana's expertise would be needed to get their engine started within the next 5 minutes, or the hull would be breached and they'd go down. Desperately, she worked as Superman sped to stop the collision his way. A powerful clap of his hands created a sonic blast that knocked the ships apart, but soon they'd be heading toward each other again, with the storm still raging. Even as Lana got the propellers on the tanker moving again, Clark could see the ships would crash into one another, no matter what he did. Still, he refused to give up, just as Lana refused to give up. As Clark struggled to force the cargo ship out of the tanker's path, he could feel their hulls grinding together, but he was suddenly thrown back as the ship's cargo exploded, knocking him all the way to shore while leaving the tanker unscathed. He had succeeded. From shore, he listened as the captain congratulated Lana on her success. She knew it hadn't been her efforts that saved them. Even so, he commended her for her perseverance, without which they might all have been dead. Nearby, a man on the shore called out to Clark, offering him shelter. Knowing the storm would only get worse, he realized they'd need more cover and began dragging the remains of an overturned boat to bolster their makeshift shelter. However, even with all his strength, he had been drained by his fight with the storm and required help, which his hosts were happy to provide.